You're listening to Win-Win, an entrepreneurial community with your host, Ben Wolf.
What does a great integrator even look like? That is what we're going to talk about today on this episode of the Win-Win podcast with me, your host, Ben Wolf. This is the official podcast of Wolf's Edge Integrators. And before we get into talking about that topic today, I want to introduce our guest today who's going to be speaking and we're going to be learning from today. He has owned several businesses, from a multi-million-dollar real estate company to restaurants in Chicago. He is an expert EOS implementer. He is the coach or the head coach, something like that, of the implementer development team. There's going to be a link to his page in the eosworldwide.com website where you can learn more about him. And with that, I give you our guest today, Jim Coyle. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Now, I don't want to take Jill Young's spot. She's technically the head coach. I don't know.
I appreciate
They just changed all our names. I don't want to. Jill will watch and be like, "Hey, wait." And I'm like, no.
Yeah.
So
the head coach, right? The coach or a coach on the implementer development.
The implementer development team. And so I'm a coach. The coaches of the coaches. So
right. Very meta. Very, very meta. Well, to bring us down from that high level, give us, if you can, a quick 2-minute background on, I guess, sort of like where you come from and how we got to be where we are today and what we're talking about today.
You got it. Yeah. And so I always say that my story starts with the fact that my passion. And so my passion is I love helping businesses get to the next level, to achieve the level of success they were built to achieve. And a lot of times, Ben, I'm saying this to a group of people. And so I then usually flip it and just tell them, like, at the end of the day, you're not my passion. And I know that sounds harsh, but I realized that it was these companies. I loved making companies great. And I come about this very honestly. I've run, I think it's now up to 12 of my own businesses. And through that work, through my sweat and tears and sitting in every one of those leadership teams at some point and worried about would I have the product that I promised that I'd be selling the next week because I couldn't afford it, or would I be able to make payroll? And through all of that, I realized that life didn't need to be this complicated and business didn't need to be this complicated. And so I think it's now, almost 20 years ago. Yeah, 2014, I started Nexus Business Solutions, my business advisory company, to find the simpler approach. Simple doesn't equal easy, but I wanted to really just simplify business for small, mid-sized companies. That was really my target. I loved entrepreneurs. And I found, as I started to dig in and build this tool set, that this was very much needed. And I've worked in, big business. I worked at Accenture and I worked at a bunch of other, clients as a part of Accenture and other corporations, but that wasn't my passion. I really thought that small, mid-sized businesses needed their own set of tools. And so I built those. And then I read Traction. This is back when it was self-published. There was spelling errors, and Gino had, literally rolled it off the presses himself, is the way I have it envisioned, where he's, got the old mimeograph. Yeah, he's cranking out copies. I don't think that's how it happened, but that's what I have in my head. And I read it, and I was like, I could push through all the spelling errors because I'm not known for spelling. But I realized, wow, there's some real genius here. And so I ended up talking to Don Tinney, who actually lives in my town, who was Gino's partner in EOS Worldwide, who started EOS Worldwide with Gino. And we ended up having this conversation. It was interesting that I read the book and then I said, well, how can I learn more? And the guy actually lives in my town. And so him and I had some coffee. And I really started to learn more and more about EOS. And as I really dove in, I realized they built a better mousetrap, Ben. Now, there was some ego bruising, if I was honest with you. There was somebody smarter than me, of course. But, when you get hit over the head with it, sometimes it's a little harder to get your arms around. And I, luckily, with some good counsel, I just got my head around the fact that this was a better tool set to take to my clients. So I started to transition my clients, and they all loved it. So that was in 2000. I started implementing EOS in 2010. And so with all the implementers that are left, I'm implementer 16. So I'm one of the the old guard. I like to think of myself as not very old, but I started this journey of helping entrepreneurs when I was 31. And so, yeah, 20 years ago, July will be my 20th anniversary. So,
Wow,
yeah,
congratulations.
yeah, thank you, thank you. So it's fun that this kind of comes full circle, and then it's kind of fun to tell you the story. So maybe a little longer than 2 minutes, but
Yeah, I
I'm excited
appreciate it.
about it.
Definitely gives a good context, and so you're sort of jumping ahead to a particular part, maybe one of the most important parts of this EOS tool set that that you're teaching people. One of them is the visionary and the integrator. So
Mhm.
just like a quick background for people who are maybe not familiar or who maybe have misconceptions. Like what is a visionary, what's an integrator, and what's the difference between them?
Yeah, sure. So at the end of the day, the visionaries are almost always, there's always exceptions to every rule, but we'll just say generally the rule is that they are the entrepreneur who started the organization. They are the person who has 1,000 ideas a week, but really only one of them is good if we were honest with that entrepreneur. But it's that one that ultimately takes it to the next level. They're great at big relationships, but at the end of the day, they really don't like managing the moving pieces. They don't like the details. They like the big picture. They are the people that uh, really are the reason why everything exists. And so, if you have an Apple phone or an Apple Watch, or I'm wearing Apple AirPods, I'm not hearing you today without, a visionary that we would call Steve Jobs. His integrator, Tim Cook, most people would never have heard of if Steve had died, actually. And to be honest, Tim Cook would have stayed in the background. And so the integrator, the puzzle piece to the visionary, is the person who is the great at management. They're great at leading and managing and holding people accountable. They're great at the details. They're really great at ultimately taking ideas and ultimately bringing them to fruition. They are the person that are the execution of it. I like to think of it as, if you think of a ship, the person who sets the course is the visionary, kind of outward looking, and the captain, that first mate, the integrator, is the person who's steering the ship, making sure it all happens. And so that's actually the difference between the two. And that integrator is, I also like to think of, I love boats, as you're about to hear. I also like the idea, like they're the coxswain. They're making sure that we're all rowing in that same speed in that same direction, and really just pulling it. And so that is really the difference between the two.
Well, let me ask you this. A lot of people listening to this, would, there's like an interesting stage in a business, right? When you're big enough, like I guess until you get big enough to have that, like a great person that can really hold everything hold everything and everyone together and ensure that all the pieces and parts are, like you said, rowing in the same direction, rowing in the right direction, in that we're executing towards this destination point that, that the visionary has laid out. It's hard, like till you get to a size where you have enough of a team and enough people, and you have a leadership team in place, and you have an integrator and somebody who can hold on to it. That's not requiring the visionary or someone else to drive them, to babysit them, so to speak. Right. And, so gonna get to this difficult place. Like, yeah, how does a visionary get the business to the point where they can get that right integrator, that person who could really own the driving of the execution of the day-to-day within the business into place, without that, like with not him or herself maybe having as much attention to detail or as much interest or aptitude for that. And how can they get to that point where they're ready to have a full-time integrator? Like there's a huge gap in between starting up a business, unless you have some big funding and, you could start that all off. But, most of us are in this small and mid-sized business world that people are organically growing. So how do you bridge that gap to get to that point where you could bring on and have that great integrator? We'll talk in a minute about, again, what does a great integrator even look like? How do you do that in a minute? But like, how do you bridge that gap from startup, like through those first few million and those first couple, 1 or 2 dozen team members without that integrator's nature?
Yeah, so good question. In the beginning, and I've sat down with people in the beginning, and even I say this about EOS, sat down with a company pretty much more startup phase. I would say phase one, right? We talk about second phase businesses or second stage businesses. You'll hear people use that term. And so first stage businesses or phase, I've heard it used both ways, I just tell them, I've sat down with one the other day and they said, okay, EOS, I've heard about it. This is something I want to do, and I'm willing to help anybody. And so I sat down, did a 90-minute meeting with them, and I got to the end and I said, Ben, now don't do this. And the owner was like, now, what do you mean? I said, don't worry about any of this. I wanted to do this because I wanted to give you this. I want you to see where you can go with this, but this is not right now where you should be thinking. Maybe there's a part or a piece you should take. Definitely shouldn't use me. You should just go out and sell, excuse my phrase, but just sell more shit. Like, just get out there and get this business going. And so I'll be honest, in the beginning, I don't think a lot of them really should even worry about EOS or an integrator in the beginning. Mm-hmm. Just go out and get the business, get this thing going, make the mistakes. Another implementer, Walt Brown, always says, just go make a mess. And that's what I say to some of these implementers in the beginning. Just go make a mess, do what you need to do. And then at some point, you're going to realize you can't keep your arms around all of this.
Right.
And when that's the case, I do think EOS and an integrator, which I do think happens around the same time, Ben, where there's a need for both, that timing, when that happens, great, come talk to me. And then, I love to start to have that conversation with them about an integrator. And so for sure, there's sometimes in the companies, lucky entrepreneurs have that person already. Like, they're just in the
maybe
business.
There's a partner or a co-founder or something like that.
Perfect. Yeah. There's an operations person who actually is doing a lot of that work, although they call themselves the COO. They're really not an integrator, but they really are kind of playing, both roles, running operations in that. And so some companies are lucky enough, and those are great. And I love working with them because I'll be honest, they got there faster, less headaches. They got there faster. It's a smoother run organization. But to your point, and I'm getting there, sorry, a long way to get to your answer. So in the beginning, don't worry about it. Once they get there, that second stage business, then they really start to have to think about that. And how they do that is the hard part. And this is where I need to sit down with them and talk to them. If they have somebody internally, great. I mean, I'll be honest, that is ideal. And I know that you and I would both agree that if they have somebody ideal and that's perfect, it's their puzzle piece and all those kinds of things, great.
Yeah, they've got the institutional knowledge.
Yeah, it's all there. Like, that's ideal. It doesn't happen as much as they need. And so, or as much as I'd like, excuse me. But if it's there, perfect. They don't need Ben Wolf in your team, right? And so, but a lot of times that isn't the case, and they also can't afford a full-time. This is that in-between stage, which now I'm getting to your question, I think. And so what I'll do lots of times, Ben, is I will recommend a fractional integrator for those recommendations, because they actually don't even know what an integrator is, nor what a good one looks like. And so it worries me that when they go out to hire one, they actually don't know what they're looking for. Right. And so I've seen this. I was actually helping a buddy of mine who runs a doctor's practice, pretty much. And a huge doctor's practice has got like 20 doctors and I mean, twice that, more than that actually, and then support staff. And they were trying to hire pretty much an integrator. And so he didn't call it that, but I knew what he was talking about. But they didn't know, a bunch of doctors, they didn't know what that looked like. They didn't know. And he said, we keep hiring the wrong people. I'm like, because you don't have a clue what you're actually hiring. And he's like, oh my God, I don't think we do. And so it's the same for my visionaries in this case, that they don't know. And unfortunately, then they don't get that puzzle fit. And then all of a sudden the integrator is a bad thing. And then that's the last thing I want as an EOS implementer. I really need them seeing value in that integrator. And so a lot of times with fractional integration is the way to go for them if there's not somebody internally.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. It's, I usually say that, like, why are these people successful at the first stages of their business? Because they just have maximum agility. I mean, again, there's no process, no structure. nothing rigid that's preventing them from just being absolutely agile in the way that they grow the business, sell, fulfill for clients, whatever. And like you said, or quoting Walt Brown, make a mess. And
Yeah.
I definitely hear that. And so that's a great point. It's a good point to know. And I want to dive into one thing you just said also a little bit more, which is that uh, people don't know. Like again, you don't know what you don't know. And I guess number one, why are people bad at finding the right integrator?
Mhm.
And like, what are the things that happen when they try to find a right integrator without knowing what that even looks like?
Yeah, and to be honest, they just end up, well, in my friend is a good example. But I've seen this with my clients as well. He's just top of mind because we was having that conversation. But at the end of the day, they don't hire well, and then unfortunately, they think that thing is bad. It's
Right.
kind of like having, there's a bunch of my entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial organizations. They think meetings are bad, Ben, and so I tell them, you guys have been having a whole bunch of bad meetings and you're blaming the meeting. It's because of how
Right.
well you've run it. And so
Right.
the meeting isn't bad. It's actually how you run the meeting is actually bad.
Yeah.
I jokingly say, if you watch me play baseball, you would never want to play baseball. Like, you'd be like, I don't need to watch this. This is horrible because I'm a terrible baseball player. But I grew up with a guy named Derek Jeter. You watch him play baseball, you're like, wow, this is actually fun to play. Like I could see playing that. I could see watching that. It's more interesting. I think a lot of times we imprint on it and we imprint on the wrong thing. You hired
Right.
poorly. And so then you blame the integrator role. And that's what's happened with some of my clients is that they're like, integrators don't work. I'm like, oh, jeez.
So these
Except
people
for,
think
yeah,
these people think that they can never let go. I mean, because that's sort of like they're decreed
correct.
or doomed to always be in the thick of it
Yeah.
forever. Like that's what they take away from that experience.
Unfortunately, yeah, that this is their their cross to bear, their plight, and the thing is that just it always seems like stop, and I try to bring them back,
Right.
hang
Doesn't have
on.
to be that way.
It doesn't have to be that way. Walt Disney, Steve Jobs, Henry Ford, these are all people who had integrators, pretty smart people. If you like them or not, doesn't matter. They were really smart and very successful in business. So maybe, that and I forget what we're up to now, 18,000 companies that have used EOS, and the 14,000 of them that have integrators, maybe there's somebody else who there is another way. And so luckily, hopefully they're listening to me as a advisor really for them to be able to hear this. But if not, sometimes they unfortunately move on and think that it's broken. And so I try to stop that problem from happening right in the beginning, Ben, so that they don't go thinking the integrator role is bad.
Right.
But I really want them to get their head around really what that looks like. And I think Rocket Fuel is genius around that. But I don't know if it still gives them enough or everyone enough. Some people it does enough to really understand what a great integrator is.
Mm-hmm. So what do so tell me a story, right? Somebody, what were they going through? What was happening where, where what you did to find, or help them ensure that they made the right choice. And despite the fact that they never had any personal experience with what a great integrator looks like previously, that you're able to, help put them in the right direction. And, just tell me about what happened.
Yeah. And so organization, I think they're at this time about a $60-70 million organization. And so good sized organization, had been using EOS for a while. Their visionary owner had a partner before who was kind of sitting in the integrator role, but then he jumped into it because he was struggling with that person.
Mm-hmm.
He was sitting in the visionary and the integrator seat. He called himself the Vigigrator. I said, it sounds like you make juice. And so he made up his own term. I said, well, that's a term EOS doesn't own, so that's fine. He then says, okay, so, I'm going to be the Vigigrator. And I said, okay, I think at the end of the day, you're going to find that that's going to be difficult as you grow. And this is This was back when they were about a $25 million organization. And he was not a typical visionary. He was able to get his arms around it enough to get the company to grow. But then he realized his true talents. And to be honest, he wasn't as happy in the role. And so he was able to move it a little bit, but he realized he couldn't take it any farther. And so then they became a $60-70 million organization. They grew a ton with EOS. And he realized, I just can't get my arms around it. That's the visual I get a lot of times from my visionaries, where it's like,
Yeah.
We were doing great work and now we weren't. And this was the analogy that I used with him, Ben, as I said, look, he said, it's Jim, but this has worked. This helped us to get here, this model, the way we've been doing it. And I said, that's great, but you've driven to the coast and now you keep trying to drive your car into the water and it keeps stalling and you're not going to get any farther. Like, I don't think you're ever going to get past this point. I said, you got to get in the boat. And that means revolutionizing the way you look at this thing. And so, and that's going to be hard. So you're going to have to make some hard decisions. And to be honest, it's going to be really uncomfortable for you for a little bit until you're able to make those choices. And he said, okay, what do you think some of those choices are? And there was some other things, but I thought the big one was the integrator one. And I said, I think you're ready for an integrator. And so and I told him, this is me from the cheap seats. And I'm your implementer. I'm not a consultant or anything, but if you're asking me, and this was a him and I conversation, and I said, if you're asking, this is what I think I'm seeing. And so he said, okay, all right. And I said, so do you know what that looks like? And he said, I think so. I think I do. And so he went out looking. And this is before I kind of realized that most of my visionaries don't truly understand what that looks like. I thought he could, to be honest, Ben, because he had sat in that role for a while,
Right.
And he wasn't great, in which I'm not, I stabbed him in the front. He knew, I told him that I think he was struggling in that role, but he did pretty good for a visionary. And so he tried to go down that role, struggled with it, tried to bring somebody internally, ended up parting ways with his partner, found out that wasn't working. And so he bought his partner out, and a lot of things were actually happening. And I then said, look, I'm a little worried you don't know what this looks like. Why don't we get somebody in there fractionally? And I believe one of the best fractional approaches, Ben, is where somebody comes in as a fractional integrator and is there just for a time being. The whole point is ultimately to get them to a place where then they can take it over. And I said, just have a conversation with somebody. And so I did. I connected him to the person who was more local to me, who I thought, that maybe this is the best person for him. And this is a number of years ago. And he said, okay, great. Got connected with him. And he said, okay, what's this look like? They got in. He said, you know what? I think I really like this person. His name was Rick. And I said, great, give Rick a try, see how it goes. And it ended up completely being transformative. The team loved it. Everybody loved it. They asked Rick to stay, which he never does. And he says, nope, let's develop somebody either internally or let's hire somebody in. And so, he righted the ship. They truly understood what an integrator looked like. And then it was great because they were really able to develop the person internally. And now they have this, person who's doing really great work in there. And I think that they probably could use some integrator coaching. I think they could use a little of the Ben Wolf team to get a little more coaching, but still, they never would have had the success they've had without having that fractional integrator.
Right. And Rick Wilson is a great guy. It is, one of the real OGs in this, in this whole space. I've learned a lot from him. So he's a great guy. What was it about seeing that seasoned, experienced fractional integrator in there for the time being to get them ready and get them to the place where they could have someone full time in that role who saw by example and by modeling what that looks like? Like, I guess, from what you heard or what like, what did they see? Like, what did they see in that person? What was modeled there that said, that's what it is. That's what a great integrator looks like.
Yeah, interesting, because I'm not in the day-to-day. And so you're right to say what I know. And so it's less than, what was really going on. But I don't think they truly understood, actually, Ben, and this is from their words, what actual accountability look like. I don't think they knew what healthy accountability looked like. That's a better way of saying it. And I think that they saw it as more of a shaming and as a either accountability as beating people up for not doing what they said and being, inappropriate, to be honest, in a really a more of a dictator, or they saw it as this more of this laissez-faire that, I told them to get it done, and if they don't get it done, I mean, that's on them, kind of thing. And it's like, okay, you guys have missed it. It's just simply asking, Ben, if I'm holding you accountable, Ben, you said you were going to get this done, you didn't. Why the gap? What's going on? Right? And it's having that conversation. It's finding out why the gap. I always like to say accountability is really just about helping people understand the gap. and so I think they didn't know that. And so the biggest thing that they saw was what healthy accountability looked like. And I think that ended up being transformative for the organization, because guess what? My key leaders are sitting in that seat. They didn't know what healthy accountability looked like. And guess what they're doing? Unhealthy accountability. And neither one of the edge. Yeah. Right. And so, of course, right, they don't know any better. And I don't mean that rudely. I mean that in this is, when brought up in a certain situation, this is what to be normal. And so I don't think anyone was in the wrong, but I don't think they were as healthy as they could be. So I think that was the biggest thing that they saw, Ben.
Right. Yeah, that's, and it's such a great point too. And I always tell my clients, I tell everybody this point also, is that like, if you grew up in a big corporate environment, like you always have a manager. If it's a good place, you have a manager to look up to who shows what your manager looks like. And then when you get to that manager seat, you have other managers above you at that level. And at every stage of your growth, if you're on a management track, you have models for what a great leader or manager looks like in your business. And you just keep growing with that to whatever extent you grow. But all of us in the SMB, the small and mid-sized business space, the entrepreneurial business space, none of us have that the vast majority of the time, because the members of the leadership team, the owner, the visionary, the integrator, everybody who grows up, they grow up in the organization. And at every stage, when they go from a frontline worker to a TL, and from a TL to a manager, et cetera, to a member of the leadership team, at every stage, it's the first time they've ever been at that level. And they didn't have anyone above them, and they didn't have anyone above them. So they've never had it modeled, as you said, for the members of the leadership team, for the integrator, for the visionary. I mean, none of them have had it. So they're all just reinventing the wheel, which is, part of the reason why EOS is so valuable, because like, how do you run a business? Well, you don't have to reinvent the wheel about how to run a business. Like, there's lots of people who have done it before. There's an out of the box solution. You can focus your energy on actually making the business better rather than how do you run a business, right? You can sort of skip that part, focus your energy on what really matters. But I think it's the same thing for leadership management, and any role, leadership team, integrator, whatever. That's just such a challenge. And so, having an experienced fractional integrator, or if you can hire somebody experienced, that's wonderful, but oftentimes you can't afford somebody with the level of experience that you actually need.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that's the sad truth. And that's where I like the interim play, where there's something in between that can help them.
Okay. So how would you say, when is a fractional integrator the right, when is that the right solution? When should people think about that, as opposed to hiring or just elevating somebody?
Yeah. And so if they have somebody, Ben, I still think that's the best solution. If they have somebody and they understand what a great integrator looks like, and they can move into that role, and I always love somebody internal. I think that's the best bet. And I think that's always true. Why fractional, I think, is in this case where they don't know what a great integrator looks like. They truly don't understand that role. I think fractional integrators can help sometimes when they're in between. Like, they had to let an integrator go. They understand what a great integrator is, but they can't go without one for a while. And it takes a while to get a good integrator. And so I've seen.
And you don't want to compromise. You don't want to be rushed into a hasty decision.
Correct. And I've seen that. You've seen that. It's not good. And then they blame the role, right? Not the poor hiring. Right. And so there's that interim phase where they had an integrator, they need one. I also find that sometimes there's integrators who get people to one point, Ben, and so when they get to this point, and then the integrator unfortunately isn't capable to take them to the next level, and so they grew with the company, and then the company outgrew them,
Right.
and then what ends up happening is they can make a mess. Most people not intentionally. I've had a one integrator I think it was intentional, but ended up being bad. But the idea that it's usually not intentional, they just don't know what they're doing. They're mucking it up. The fractional integrator can come in then and kind of clean stuff up, to be honest, like just right the ship.
Right.
And sometimes that's good because you need a quick right the ship sometimes.
Right.
And so that's another time. Sadly, I've seen it where they're in a tough spot where they need to make things happen quicker. And so they don't have the time to develop somebody. They need to have it quicker.
Mhm.
I had some embezzlement issue with one of my clients,
Oh,
and they didn't realize the financial, they were in real bad financial situation and they had no idea. And so they had to right the ship now. It was like I got an emergency phone call kind of thing. And I'm like, you don't have time to hire somebody. Like, you got to get somebody in there. And I'm not, that's not me. I don't have that skill set. And so it wasn't a turnaround because they were a really successful company and they were still growing, but they didn't have the money to do what they needed to do because of the embezzlement. And
Right.
so that was another case. Now, I really hope, Ben, none of your listeners ever have that problem. And
That's
so no one
pretty
ever
rare.
needs that. That is very rare. And I hope no one ever needs that. It's just in my head, one of my other times I've recommended a fractional integrator. And so those are the two main ways are definitely you're in between somebody and you need somebody now. And you don't know what one looks like and you need to bring somebody in. Those are the two main ways, Ben, that I've been recommending. Fractional integrator. So
yeah. No, that's great. I mean, another type of use case I've seen is to recognize that, sometimes when you need major change done, there's a certain kind of person who GW sees, who would excel at, driving major change. And there's somebody else, maybe not the same person, who would excel at managing the company over the long term, maybe more incremental change, but more management, less change management. And so, one thing that I've seen is, I'll even in my own personal experience, like I got to a point where we're like building a business up to a certain point, and after we got to sort of a plateau, I mean, there's still steady growth, but not major change so much anymore. And I just got to the point where like, I don't feel like I'm accomplishing anything anymore. Like I just wasn't, just to like manage this thing for the next 10 years was just not appealing. I looked for additional ways to grow and eventually left that company for another opportunity, because even though I accomplished great things and love the company and grew up there entrepreneurially, but just my interest was in building and in major change, major development. And other people, though, are not going to excel so much at the major change development, but you want them for the long term. And they would be great for that. So I think also there's sort of a different DNA that, the different people need at different stages of business. And I do find that our fractional integrators, I'm sure many others, have a sort of a visionary spark, right? They've got like a higher quick start on Colby, and they're, able to come in and, work with major change and then pass the baton to whoever is going to be the best, whether it's from internal or hiring long-term. It's another use case that I've seen.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. It actually has got me thinking about a client right now where that they, this not recommended, but they were a part of another company. They were bought and pulled out from that company. They moved into a new location and brought their employees, and then needed to hire about double the staff and got a new ERP all in the same year.
Wow.
It was major. And so it's funny. I'm now thinking, they could have used one of those people during that time, because I think their integrator was more about once the ship's kind of not being built, but it's on the water, it's much easier.
You can sail it.
Yeah, right. I could sail anything. I don't know if I can build it. And that's really what was happening. It was kind of, and it wasn't a startup because it had been there for, the company had been around for, I think it was like 15 years. But because it got pulled out, from another company, and because, and ended up feeling more startup-ish, And so, yeah, that's got me thinking, that probably was some of the struggles they had.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Well, last question. When is fractional integrator probably not the right solution for somebody? Not something to look into.
Yeah. And so, and I've said it a couple times, if they have somebody, it's just always easier.
Yeah.
What
And you can still
I,
have coaching. I mean, you can still
well,
develop
that's
that person. You could have integrator coaching, which I mean, we do, but like, some kind of development,
correct.
integrator masterclass, whatever. I mean, some sort of development you could still invest in.
Yeah, it's funny. I was going right there. Like they
Okay.
should call you and get coaching, or they should get, Rocket Fuel for sure. And because there's the free version, just go out there and check that out. And then integrator mastery classes, that kind of stuff. So that's when I think, you know what, we're at a spot where we can have the time. We have a person. They're going to be good. We just need to develop some. So I don't think fractional makes sense.
Yeah.
But the
I
coaching
certainly
makes
agree.
sense.
Right.
And I think then there's other times when, in the beginning, I think it's funny. I now, all the times I don't recommend it, I've said, I think startups, just get out there, go. It's not an expense that you need. If you have somebody, you're lucky. But if you don't, just build this thing up until you
Right. As
start
much as you can till it
Yeah.
gets beyond what you can hold.
Yeah, the mess is too big, right? Go make a mess. The mess got too big. And so that's another thing. I just think that some companies, that doesn't make sense. I also think I had another company and they were doing good work. And it's funny, I can go two ways with this one, Ben. But the owner decided they wanted to sell, and came to me, didn't talk to anybody else, and just kind of said, "Hey, this is what I'm thinking of doing." And I think they could have gotten things packaged up better if they had an integrator in there. And so he took it to a level, and then he didn't want to go beyond that, and he wanted to sit in that seat, right? Couldn't let go. I think if they would have got a fractional integrator, this would have been a good time. Actually, Ben, this is another use case where come in, get it kind of all buttoned up and ready to sell.
Right.
But
much you have a higher valuation.
Correct. Oh, all these things.
Easier time selling.
But he didn't have that timeline. And so in that case, because in my head, I'm like, right the ship, get a better multiple. He didn't want that. He didn't have the timeline. And so I think he ended up taking less money because of it. And I think he might have even known that as well. And so there's another time that I think that if you don't have the time because fractional integration doesn't happen instantly. It's not like one of your team shows up and it's like, I brought my wand. And so
yeah, there's no wand.
There's no wand. I'm like, Harry still has it. I don't have it. And so I also think that if they think, there's some type of magic that's going to happen from this, that thinking, I got to get out of their head before they bring somebody on as well.
Yeah.
But really the two main ways are startups and if they've got somebody, in my opinion.
Right. Okay. Yeah, fair enough. No, I appreciate it. I appreciate you sharing it. I mean, how can people figure out what a great integrator looks like? I mean, again, they can, if you have a good integrator or potential integrator, you could have coaching. Mm-hmm. If you don't, you could, obviously if you can hire a great experienced integrator, or you can, again, bring in fractional, which is obviously what we do. Get somebody experienced who's done it before, who's been where you want your business to go, and they're not doing it for the first time. They could help take you there and elevate your hopefully your future potential integrator, or help you hire additional, your long-term integrator, and also elevate the leadership team to be people who can truly own their roles in the business and not, as true ownership.
Yeah. No, I think that sometimes it's good to, another weird analogy, but kind of clean things up before you get, your full-time person in there. And there's somebody that needs to kind of do that. And not that a fractional integrator is the French maid necessarily, but
I was going to say janitorial, but okay, that's a different image.
Yeah, I gave a whole different image. But that's not the case, but I do think that sometimes you're right about the leaders, that they need to be developed a little bit. We just need everybody to really understand what's going on. And I think sometimes people put that on me. And I'm very clear now, you guys have to figure that out. I'm an EOS implementer.
Right.
I know EOS.
But you teach them. But sometimes people need more repetition. I mean, they may hear it, every quarter or every couple quarters from you and things that come up, or the initial implementation, but they've got to hear that. It's got to be repeated. They've got to hear it from you again, and then they've got to see it modeled, and then, and see a bunch of examples. At some point after 10, 15 repetitions, it can get imprinted.
Yeah. And if not, then at some point we got the wrong person.
Right.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that's the, the other times when I think that it could be useful. So,
yeah. Well, I really appreciate you coming and teaching and talking on what a great integrator looks like. How do you figure out what that looks like? I appreciate it. Thanks for making the time today.
Yeah. No, this is fun. Thanks, man.
Awesome. I appreciate you coming. And again, everybody else, we'll see you on the other side. Thank you.
You're listening to Win-Win, an entrepreneurial community with your host, Ben Wolf.